The room wasn't loud, but it wasn't quiet either. Conversations floated through the air, glasses clinked softly, and a small crowd stood in a loose circle as tension slowly began to build. Nobody knew exactly how it started. Maybe it was a comment. Maybe it was a look. But within seconds, the atmosphere shifted. 3 professional bodyguards stood shoulder to shoulder. Tall, broad, confident, each one easily over 240 pounds. Their suits stretched tightly over disciplined frames built for intimidation. These weren't amateurs. They were trained to protect, to control situations, to make problems disappear without hesitation. And directly in front of them stood a man who looked nothing like a threat. Lean, relaxed, almost casual. Bruce Lee didn't raise his fists. He didn't step back either. He just stood there, calm, balanced, completely still. The difference in size was obvious. Anyone watching could see it. The bodyguards exchanged quick glances, half-smirks forming as they subtly closed the space between them and him. It wasn't an attack. It was pressure, the kind designed to make someone nervous, to make them shrink, to force them to submit without a single move being thrown. But something felt off. Bruce's breathing didn't change. His posture didn't tighten. His eyes didn't show fear. They showed awareness. The crowd started to notice. Conversations faded. A few people stepped closer. Something was about to happen. You could feel it in the air. The bodyguards shifted their weight forward, confident in numbers, confident in size. Yet Bruce Lee stood there like the storm hadn't arrived yet. No anger, no ego, no panic, just stillness. And in that stillness, there was something far more dangerous than aggression: control. What nobody in that room understood at that moment was this. The situation wasn't escalating because of intimidation. It was escalating because 3 men believed size alone would decide the outcome. And the man standing in front of them, he had already calculated every movement before the first one even happened. The tension tightened. The circle around them grew smaller. And in just a few seconds, everything was about to change. The air in the room grew heavier, almost tangible, as the 3 bodyguards slowly moved forward. There was no sudden rush, no dramatic gestures, just measured, confident steps. Each footfall seemed to echo louder than it actually did. The crowd held its breath, sensing that something was about to happen, but nobody could predict what. The bodyguards weren't reckless. They were professionals. Every movement was calculated. Every inch of ground they gained was deliberate. Their eyes were locked on Bruce Lee, searching for a sign of weakness, a flinch, anything that could give them leverage. But Bruce? He didn't flinch. He didn't blink too fast. He didn't even shift his weight unnecessarily. He remained calm, poised, almost serene. To the untrained eye, it looked like inaction. But those who knew him, even just slightly, could see it. He was observing, calculating, preparing. One of the bodyguards, the largest of the 3, leaned slightly forward, his face a mixture of amusement and challenge. "Think you can handle us?" he muttered under his breath. The words weren't loud, but the tone carried enough confidence to fill the space. He expected a reaction, maybe fear, maybe nervousness. Instead, he got silence. Bruce's eyes met his, not with hatred, not with aggression, but with something sharper, something deeper. A calm certainty that unnerved more than a shout ever could. The second bodyguard, quicker on his feet, circled slightly to the side. He wanted to flank, to test boundaries, to assert dominance. His hand twitched subtly near his pocket, as if ready to act at the slightest provocation. The crowd shifted, leaning forward. Every person there felt a kind of tension that made their own hearts race. The third, smallest but surprisingly agile, moved in from the back. His movements were subtle, almost casual, but in them was a clear message. We are a team. We are a unit. Don't misjudge us. The combined presence of these 3 men created an almost physical pressure, an invisible force that seemed to push inward toward Bruce, trying to trap him. And yet, he didn't move. He didn't react. Not even the smallest muscle betrayed him. The room's energy shifted. People started whispering. Something was happening, but they didn't understand what. This wasn't about fighting yet. This was a test. a psychological battle. The bodyguards wanted to intimidate, to force submission through sheer size, presence, and confidence. They believed their training, their bulk, and their reputation would be enough. But Bruce Lee had already won the first round without throwing a punch. He shifted his gaze slightly, scanning their stances, reading their intentions. A twitch here, a micro-expression there. The smallest detail told him everything he needed to know. In those moments, he was untouchable, not because of brute strength, not because of technique yet, but because he had mastered control over fear, over perception, over anticipation. Then the first subtle move came. One of the bodyguards leaned forward slightly, pressing the space between them. The others mirrored him, confident. But Bruce's presence, his stillness, made them hesitate ever so slightly. Just enough. That hesitation, though almost imperceptible, was the crack in their armor. And in that tiny opening, the narrative of the next 12 seconds had already begun to unfold. The room had shifted, not physically but mentally. The bodyguards still loomed large, still radiating confidence, but something invisible had begun to crack in their minds. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but anyone paying attention could sense it. Bruce Lee was no longer just a man standing in front of them. He had become a force, a psychological presence that made even trained professionals hesitate. This wasn't about fists or kicks yet. This was about awareness. Bruce Lee had mastered something far more powerful than size or strength. He had mastered perception. Every twitch, every glance, every minute shift in the bodyguard's posture told him their intentions. He could read aggression like an open book. And more importantly, he could manipulate it. The largest bodyguard stepped slightly closer, trying to intimidate. He flexed his arms subtly, chest forward, expecting Bruce to flinch, expecting to see hesitation. But Bruce remained perfectly still. His eyes were locked on the man, unblinking, calm, almost serene. That calmness, it was unnerving. It wasn't passive. It was active control. It said without words, I see you. I understand you. And you cannot surprise me. The second bodyguard tried to assert dominance, shifted his stance. He moved faster, circling, testing boundaries. But Bruce's gaze followed him effortlessly, every motion analyzed, every strategy anticipated. The smallest sign of aggression from the bodyguard, a tightening of the jaw, a flex of the shoulder, was enough for Bruce to know exactly how far he could go and how quickly he could end any escalation. It was more than observation. It was psychological warfare. The bodyguards didn't realize they were being assessed, measured, and subtly manipulated in real time. Their confidence, once towering, began to flicker. Hesitation crept into their movements. That microsecond of doubt, the fraction of a second they thought Bruce might be vulnerable, was all it took for the shift to begin. Bruce didn't speak. He didn't threaten. He didn't even raise his voice. He didn't have to. His presence alone was enough. Every second he remained calm. Every slight shift of weight, every measured blink communicated a single, silent truth. I am in control. And that control was magnetic. The crowd could feel it. Spectators leaned in, their eyes wide. Even they weren't sure what was coming next, but they could feel the power dynamic tipping. The energy in the room had subtly, but unmistakably shifted. The bodyguards' intimidation tactics, once seemingly unshakable, were faltering. The psychological pressure Bruce exerted was invisible, yet undeniable. It worked on instinct, on subconscious recognition. Trained professionals, used to reading opponents, now found themselves unknowingly reacting to Bruce's presence. Their own minds betrayed them. The larger the ego, the harder it was to admit, even internally, that something was off. And that's when Bruce subtly adjusted his stance. Not in a way anyone would notice consciously, but enough to signal readiness. Not aggression, but absolute awareness. His slight shift was enough to make one bodyguard's eyes widen imperceptibly, another's jaw tighten, and the third's confidence falter. The smallest cues, amplified by fear of miscalculation, created hesitation. This is the point most people miss. The fight had already begun. But it wasn't in the fists or the kicks or the speed. It was in the mind. Bruce had won the psychological battle before a single blow was exchanged. Size and strength were irrelevant. Ego, intimidation, and numbers meant nothing against someone who had mastered control, perception, and anticipation. The tension in the room became almost tangible. The bodyguards were still moving, but they were no longer fully confident. Their earlier certainty had eroded into cautious second-guessing. The crowd sensed it. Everyone could feel the shift. The moment was approaching. And Bruce Lee? He was calm, poised, and entirely aware of the invisible advantage he now held. In that room, in those seconds, he wasn't just defending himself. He was rewriting the rules of the confrontation. The final, inevitable step was coming. The smallest error, the slightest hesitation from the bodyguards, would change everything. And in the next 12 seconds, that moment would arrive. 12 seconds. That was all it took. It doesn't sound like much, but in those 12 seconds, a room full of confident, trained bodyguards went from smug certainty to stunned disbelief. And it all started with a shift so subtle most people would have missed it. Bruce Lee didn't move aggressively. He didn't shout or charge. He simply adjusted his stance, a slight lowering of weight, a micro shift of his center of gravity. Almost imperceptible, yet in that tiny movement, every intention, every calculation, every skill he had honed over years flashed into action. The first second, the largest bodyguard lunged slightly forward, testing Bruce's reaction. But Bruce wasn't reacting to the lunge. He was anticipating it. His eyes measured distance, timing, and balance with pinpoint accuracy. His brain was running simulations faster than the human eye could follow. In a single thought, he knew exactly where the threat would be strongest and where it would collapse first. The second bodyguard made a flanking move, attempting to cut off space, to force Bruce into a corner. But Bruce didn't panic. He didn't step back. His body was a paradox of relaxation and readiness. The smallest shift of a foot, a barely noticeable twist of a shoulder, redirected the energy of the flanking attack without anyone realizing it. The third second, the smallest of the three bodyguards, hoping to capitalize on chaos, moved with lightning speed. But chaos didn't exist. Bruce's presence was like a calm eye at the center of a storm. He absorbed, anticipated, and redirected every movement with a precision that seemed impossible. By the fourth second, the psychological shift had fully taken hold. The bodyguards, still massive, still trained, now hesitated. Their microsecond doubts had compounded. Confidence, once so solid, was now fragile. Subtle tension rippled through their movements. One twitch here, one unsure step there. They were trapped, not physically, but mentally. The fifth second, Bruce's first calculated action came. Not a strike, not an attack, just a step. But it was enough. Enough to exploit the hesitation he had created. The crowd leaned in. Conversations had stopped entirely. Everyone could feel the invisible force pressing forward, reshaping the dynamic in the room. Sixth and 7 seconds. The bodyguards tried to regain composure. They moved as a team, trying to coordinate, try to assert control. But every move they made was already anticipated. Bruce's awareness extended beyond sight. He predicted, adjusted, and guided the flow of the room with near-perfect precision. The 8th second, something subtle but critical happened. One of the bodyguards overextended, misjudging the timing. It wasn't a dramatic mistake, but in the psychological warfare Bruce had waged, it was enough. The tiniest crack became a visible opening. 9th and 10th seconds, Bruce exploited the opening, not with brute force, but with speed and timing. He redirected the bodyguard's own momentum against him. The room seemed to freeze. The sound of shifting weight, shallow breaths, and held-in gasps filled the space. The air vibrated with disbelief. 11th second. The largest bodyguard, confident a moment ago, was now off balance, stunned, and unsure of what to do next. The tiniest hint of fear flashed across his eyes. The flanking bodyguard had overcommit. The smallest one hesitated, realizing the error too late. 12th second. Instant regret. It didn't come with screams. It didn't come with chaos. It came with understanding. Understanding that size, strength, and confidence were meaningless against skill, awareness, and control. In a single, fluid series of movements, Bruce Lee had shifted the energy, rewritten expectations, and demonstrated a principle far greater than any punch. Precision beats power. Timing beats size. Mind beats muscle. In 12 seconds, the world inside that room had flipped. Confidence became doubt. Bravado became caution. Smirks became wide-eyed shock. And the lesson was unforgettable. Underestimate skill, and even giants fall, not physically first, but mentally. By the time the room exhaled, the legend had been forged. In the mind of every witness, in the tension that lingered in the air, one undeniable truth remained. Bruce Lee had already won before the first real strike landed. The moment had passed, but its impact didn't fade. The 12 seconds were over, yet the room remained frozen, suspended between disbelief and reality. The bodyguards, once towers of confidence, now moved with hesitation. Their posture, once upright and imposing, had slumped imperceptibly. The invisible shift had already changed everything. The largest bodyguard, the one who had initiated the confrontation, glanced at his companions. His eyes widened ever so slightly. Something inside him had changed, something that couldn't be undone. Confidence, that foundation they had relied upon, was cracking. The realization sank in slowly, like ice melting in a glass of water. They had misjudged him. The second bodyguard, usually the quickest to react, now hesitated mid-step. His mind replayed the sequence of events, calculating where he went wrong. Every flinch he had expected from Bruce never came. Every intimidation tactic had failed. For the first time, he felt the vulnerability of being overpowered, not by fists, not by strength, but by something far more formidable: mastery. The smallest bodyguard, the one who had tried to capitalize on chaos, now had his hands fall to his sides. He looked at Bruce with a mixture of shock and awe. His mind struggled to comprehend what had just happened. The same man they had tried to corner, a man significantly smaller, a man who seemed casual and unassuming, had dismantled the intimidation in mere seconds. Their confidence had been their weapon, and in 12 seconds, Bruce Lee had turned it into a weakness against them. Regret isn't immediate. It creeps in subtle, like a shadow stretching across the room. It begins with hesitation, then recognition, then full awareness. And that's exactly what unfolded. Every movement they made now carried a trace of doubt. Every breath came slower, every blink longer. The bodyguard had realized something critical. The fight had already been lost before it started, not with fists, but with perception. It wasn't about bruises or pain. It was about understanding the reality they had ignored. They had relied on size, numbers, and intimidation, believing that dominance was guaranteed. But Bruce Lee had proven that awareness, skill, and control outweighed all of it. And now, that truth was impossible to deny. The crowd, silent until now, began to murmur. They had witnessed the shift. They had seen the instant the confidence of trained professionals crumbled under the weight of mastery. And they felt it too, the electric tension of regret and realization spreading through the room. It wasn't fear of violence. It was fear of understanding just how completely one man could dominate a situation without aggression. The largest bodyguard exhaled sharply. His jaw tightened, and for the first time, he avoided eye contact with Bruce. Pride, previously unshakable, had been replaced with hesitation. He had been humbled, not by force, but by principle. Every ounce of his physical power felt meaningless in that moment. The second bodyguard's hands trembled slightly. He had underestimated the importance of timing, precision, and mental discipline. The lesson was now painfully clear. Ego and size are useless without awareness. Bruce's stillness, his calm presence, had become a weapon that no muscle could counter. The smallest bodyguard's eyes widened further. Every instinct he had relied upon failed him. Each tiny miscalculation had compounded, leaving him disoriented and internally defeated. The instant regret wasn't dramatic or theatrical. it was quiet, sinking into the mind like an anchor. A lesson had been delivered, one that would stay with them forever. And Bruce? He remained calm, unaffected by their hesitation. His presence alone was a statement. No boasting, no aggression, just mastery. That silent authority magnified the regret in the bodyguards' minds. They had learned the hard way that power is not measured in size, nor in numbers, nor in confidence. It is measured in skill, awareness, and control. In that moment, the room understood something profound. True mastery is invisible until it strikes. It doesn't announce itself with noise or force. And when it moves, it leaves those who misjudged it with one overwhelming emotion: regret. 12 seconds. That was all it took to shift a room, to humble professionals, and to etch the lesson into the minds of everyone present. And as the bodyguards stepped back, their eyes lingering on Bruce with newfound respect and awe, one undeniable truth remained. Underestimating him was a mistake they would never forget. The room had finally begun to breathe again, but the energy had shifted forever. The three bodyguards, once confident and imposing, now carried the weight of something far heavier than their own bulk. They had been humbled, not by a punch, not by brute force, but by mastery. And the witness of it all, the crowd, the onlookers, felt the magnitude of what had just unfolded. Bruce Lee wasn't just a man standing in the center of the room. In that moment, he had become something far larger than life itself, a living embodiment of principle, precision, and control. Every movement he made, every pause he allowed, communicated a simple yet powerful truth. Size, strength, and intimidation are nothing against awareness, skill, and discipline. The bodyguards, each physically formidable and trained to dominate, now understood something they could not unsee. Every hesitation, every microsecond of doubt, every subtle shift of their own stance had been anticipated, analyzed, and neutralized before it even fully manifested. Bruce's mastery wasn't visible in fists or feet. It was visible in his mind, his presence, his control over the situation. This is what transforms a fight into legend. It's not the knockouts or the dramatic flair. It's the demonstration of principle. Bruce Lee had shown that mastery transcends physicality, that mental precision and timing outweigh pure size and strength, that discipline and awareness create an invisible power that can humble even the most confident. The crowd, still holding their collective breath, began to grasp the scale of what they had witnessed. They had seen the turning point in a fraction of a minute, a demonstration so subtle yet so absolute that it would remain etched in memory. They didn't just see a man defeat three intimidating opponents. They saw a living lesson in dominance through mastery. And this lesson wasn't limited to the bodyguards. Every person in the room could feel it. The power of calm observation, the precision of movement, the intelligence behind every step. Bruce had created a space where size and aggression were irrelevant, a space where skill and awareness ruled. In those 12 seconds, he had taught an unspoken, unforgettable principle. True strength is measured not in force, but in the ability to control, predict, and act decisively. The bodyguard's expressions told the story. The largest one's jaw remained tight, his stance slightly lowered, no longer radiating intimidation. The second, usually quick to react, now hesitated before every movement, as if afraid of miscalculating. The smallest stood frozen, the awe in his eyes betraying the mental imprint Bruce had left. Their regret was complete, but so was their respect. They had faced a master, and they knew it. Bruce himself didn't smile. He didn't boast. He didn't need to. The legend had already been written, not in words, not in noise, but in action, awareness, and presence. His calm demeanor amplified the contrast between his mastery and the bodyguard's faltering confidence. The silence of his triumph echoed louder than any shout could. And this is why Bruce Lee became more than a fighter. He became a symbol, a reminder that true skill isn't loud. True mastery doesn't need validation. It moves quietly, precisely, and leaves an undeniable mark on everyone who witnesses it. It teaches lessons not through fear, but through undeniable authority and principle. The room slowly exhaled. The bodyguard stepped back, but the lesson remained. Their physical advantage had been nullified. Their confidence had been dismantled. The air itself seemed to respect the man standing before them. And even as the seconds passed, the memory of that shift, that lesson, lingered. It wasn't just a fight. It was a demonstration of mastery, and it would become part of the legend of Bruce Lee. Legends are rarely born from spectacle alone. They are forged in moments where skill transcends expectation, where presence commands respect, and where one man's mastery creates a story that will be remembered forever. And in that room, in those 12 seconds, Bruce Lee had become exactly that, a legend, untouchable in principle, unmatched in skill, and unforgettable in impact. The lesson was clear. Confidence, intimidation, size, even training, none of it mattered without awareness, precision, and control. And Bruce Lee had demonstrated it perfectly. The room had settled, or at least it appeared to have. The bodyguards had stepped back, their posture less rigid, their expressions betraying the lesson they had just learned. The crowd exhaled, unsure whether to cheer, gasp, or simply sit in stunned silence. But the tension hadn't truly left. Something lingered in the air, something heavier than awe, heavier than fear, anticipation. Because Bruce Lee wasn't finished. Even as the bodyguards absorbed the reality of their miscalculation, one of them, the smallest yet sharpest, tried something unexpected. Not a strike, not a move to regain dominance, but a subtle feint, a psychological test, a last-ditch effort to gauge the man who had already humbled them in 12 seconds. It was a tiny movement, a shift of weight, a glance meant to provoke reaction, and the crowd noticed immediately. The air vibrated again with that electric tension, the kind that signals something extraordinary is about to happen. Bruce's eyes followed the motion with serene precision. His body remained relaxed, but entirely ready, like a coiled spring. He didn't flinch, didn't tense, didn't even raise an eyebrow. And yet, the smallest bodyguard could feel the invisible weight of Bruce's awareness pressing down on him, as if the room itself had taken sides. The seconds stretched. 1, 2, 3. Each fraction of a second seemed to contain a lifetime of calculation. Every muscle, every stance, every breath was deliberate, choreographed invisibly. The smallest bodyguard's attempt at testing Bruce's limits failed even before it truly began, because the master had already accounted for it. The crowd leaned in. Some whispered. Some gasped. Some couldn't even breathe. Everyone felt the tension, the razor-sharp focus, the mental dominance that had already rendered the bodyguards ineffective. And yet, in that moment, there was a peculiar kind of suspense. Not because Bruce was under threat, but because what came next was unknowable, and unknowable always feels electric. Then Bruce shifted ever so slightly, a minor adjustment, barely perceptible. But in that subtle movement, there was the promise of action. It wasn't a threat, but a signal. The story was far from over. The bodyguards froze again, caught between awe and fear, fully aware that any sudden misstep would have consequences they weren't prepared for. The room seemed to hold its collective breath. Even time felt slower. The smallest bodyguard, usually confident, now hesitated mid-step. The other two watched, paralyzed by both respect and disbelief. Bruce Lee had redefined the rules in 12 seconds, and now, one unpredictable action could redefine them again. And then came the silent realization. It wasn't just skill that had created this moment. It wasn't just control, precision, or awareness. It was principle. Bruce's mastery had become more than a demonstration. It had become a narrative, a lesson written into the minds of everyone present. Each bodyguard had understood, too late, that underestimating a master has consequences beyond physical defeat. It carries a weight that lingers, a mental imprint that cannot be erased. The audience, now completely absorbed, knew this was the moment that would be remembered. They could sense the pivot, the turning point, the instant before the impossible might happen. Bruce Lee had created suspense not with drama, not with theatrics, but with sheer command of reality itself. Every eye in the room followed him. Every heartbeat synced to the tension he had orchestrated. And then, at the very edge of action, just as the bodyguards' minds raced for a strategy, Bruce's calm presence told the story before he moved a muscle. It was enough to leave everyone wondering, what would he do next? How would he close the moment? Would he act? Or would he prove that even restraint, observation, and patience were weapons more powerful than any physical strike? The room waited. Everyone waited. The legend had reached its peak. And in that pause, every witness realized something. The final second, the one that would define the outcome, was still coming. It was unseen, unpredictable, and unstoppable. In the next heartbeat, everything could change. The tension was unbearable. The anticipation, electric. And the truth remained, some moments are immortal, not because of what happens, but because of what could happen. Bruce Lee had created one of those moments, and the world, the room, and the bodyguards themselves were trapped in its grip, unable to turn away, unable to blink, and unable to forget. The final second hadn't arrived yet, but it would.